The sound of the key turning in the lock became the most terrifying sound of my childhood. It was not just a door opening, it was a signal, a warning, a reminder that whatever peace I felt while playing with my dolls or pretending that I was just another little girl was about to disappear. That metallic twist echoed through the walls like thunder, and my heart always knew before my mind had time to prepare. Fear would flood me instantly. My small hands would shake, and I would press my fingers tightly around a doll's plastic body as if it could protect me, but nothing could. The room that was supposed to be mine did not feel like mine anymore. The walls closed in each time that sound echoed. The shadows stretched longer, and even the daylight that seeped through the curtains seemed dimmer when he stepped inside. I remember counting the seconds between the key turning and the door opening, hoping for a miracle, wishing that this time the sound was nothing, that it was just my imagination. But it never was. The knob would move, the hinges would creak, and he would appear. Children live in worlds of innocence where every object has meaning. A doll can become a sister, a bed can become a castle, and laughter can erase sadness. But when you live in fear, those objects become witnesses. My dolls no longer felt like toys. They became silent witnesses of a cruelty I could not explain. I used to look at them after it was over, their painted eyes staring back at me, and I wondered why they never spoke. I wanted someone, anyone, to say something, to help me, to break the silence. But silence was all I ever received. There is something unforgettable about the way fear lives inside a child's body. It is not only in the heart, but in the skin, the breath, the bones. I felt it when I heard footsteps in the hallway, when I smelled the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the stale air of the house, when his shadow stretched across the floor, before he even stepped into the room. My body knew before I could think. My stomach tightened, my throat closed, my chest burned. I was too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to feel the danger. Sometimes I think about how different my life could have been if that key had never turned in that lock. If the door had remained closed, maybe I would have been free to stay a child. Maybe my laughter would have filled the house, instead of disappearing into tears muffled by pillows. Instead, the sound of that key was the beginning of a ritual, one that repeated itself so many times it became part of my existence. Every day, I prayed to be invisible, to vanish, to dissolve into nothing before the door opened, but no prayer was strong enough to keep him away. When you are that young, you do not have the words to describe what is happening. You just know something is wrong. You feel shame before you even understand what shame is. You feel dirty before anyone tells you what dirty means. It is as if your body already knows that what is being stolen can never be given back. I did not know what the future was, but I knew in those moments that whatever mine was supposed to be was being rewritten without my consent. The bed where I should have rested became a place of punishment. The walls that should have protected me trapped me instead. Even the light bulb above my head felt cruel, exposing me, forcing me to see things I did not want to see. At night, when the lights were off, it was worse. Darkness gave him more power. The silence of the house became an accomplice. And I lay there, wide awake, listening to the sounds outside my window, wishing the world would notice me, that someone out there would hear the silent screams stuck in my chest. What I remember most is not only the fear, but the confusion. Children trust their families. They believe their homes are safe. To learn so early that the person you were taught to admire, to respect, to see as a guide, could also be the person who brought you the most pain, shatters something inside that can never be rebuilt. It is a betrayal so deep, it changes the way you see love forever. I often wonder what my face looked like back then, if people around me could see the difference. Did they notice that my smile no longer reached my eyes? That my laughter sounded forced? That I avoided touch and looked away whenever anyone tried to ask me how I was? Or was I too good at hiding it already, trained by fear to stay silent, to cover the truth with the mask of a quiet little girl? The sound of that key was small, barely audible to anyone outside the room. but to me it was deafening. It was the beginning of a nightmare that returned over and over, teaching me lessons I never wanted to learn. It taught me that safety is fragile, that family can become danger, and that silence can be heavier than screams. Even now, long after those nights have ended, I can still hear it. The click, the turn, the release of the lock. That sound is carved into my memory, and with it comes the memory of a little girl, clutching a doll, wishing she could stay small, innocent, and safe. But innocence was not mine to keep. It was taken the moment that door opened. My brother was admired by everyone. He walked into a room and people smiled. Teachers praised him for his intelligence. Neighbors complimented his manners, and my parents beamed with pride whenever his name was mentioned. To the outside world, he was the perfect son, the perfect student, the perfect example of what every younger sibling should look up to. But that image was only a mask, carefully polished and protected. Behind closed doors, when the curtains were drawn and the house fell silent, the person everyone respected became the very person who destroyed me. There is something terrifying about living with someone who wears two faces. During the day, he would pat me on the head, laugh with friends, and play the role of the caring older brother. At dinner, he would charm our parents with stories about school and plans for the future, and they believed every word. I would sit across the table, trying to keep my hands steady as I cut my food, knowing that later, the same mouth that smiled so brightly would whisper threats into my ear. The contrast between who he was to them and who he was to me felt like living in two separate worlds, one that everyone could see, and another that only I knew. I learned quickly how much power he had. His reputation was a shield. No one would believe me if I spoke. How could I possibly convince anyone that the boy they adored was the same person who pressed fear into my skin? His charm was his weapon. He knew that as long as he performed his role well, no one would ever question him, and he performed it flawlessly. Even as he hurt me, he would remind me that nobody would take my side. He did not need to shout to control me. The weight of his false image was enough to silence me. Children are taught to look up to their older siblings, to trust them, to see them as protectors. That belief made everything worse. I had moments where I still wanted to believe in the version of him everyone else saw. I wanted to think he could be kind, that maybe the person who tormented me at night was not the real him. But each time he closed the door behind us, the illusion shattered. He was not a protector. He was a predator hiding behind the title of brother. When I try to remember his face during those moments, I struggle. It was not the same face others saw. To them, his smile was pure. To me, it was sinister, a smile that stretched too wide, that carried secrets and cruelty. I could see a different kind of light in his eyes, one that flickered with control and dominance. He did not look like the brother I once thought I knew. He looked like someone else entirely, someone who relished in the fact that he could destroy me and still walk out the next morning to be praised for his greatness. At school, other children envied me. They thought it must be wonderful to have an older brother who excelled at everything. Some girls whispered that they wished they had a brother like mine, someone who was popular, someone who seemed strong and reliable. I would smile awkwardly, nodding along, while inside I wanted to scream that they had no idea who he really was. It was a cruel joke that the very thing people admired was the mask that kept me trapped. There were moments when I studied the way adults reacted to him, the admiration in their voices, the way teachers excused his mistakes, the way neighbors spoke of him as if he were destined for greatness. It made me wonder if they would ever see me differently if they knew. Would they believe me? Or would they accuse me of lying, of trying to ruin his future out of jealousy? That fear kept me quiet. I learned to hide my trembling hands behind my back, to keep my eyes down, to smile when I needed to. I became an actress in my own life, just to survive the performance he staged for everyone else. The most painful part was that my parents trusted him completely. They left me alone with him without a second thought, proud that their eldest could take care of his little sister. They believed he was mature, responsible, safe. They had no idea they were handing me over to someone who was slowly dismantling me. Their trust in him became another weapon against me. He reminded me constantly that even they would never believe me, because in their eyes he could do no wrong, and deep down, I believed him. Living under that shadow meant that I never felt safe, not even in broad daylight. The mask he wore in public was suffocating, because it meant he could strike whenever he wanted, knowing no one would suspect him. Every time I saw someone praise him, a piece of me broke a little more. The applause he received was like chains tightening around me. His perfect image was built on my silence, and I carried the weight of it every single day. Sometimes I think about how skilled he was at deception. It was not just a trick. It was an art he had perfected. He knew when to smile, when to speak, when to act tenderly in front of others. He crafted his role like a performer on a stage, and everyone believed the act. No one suspected that behind the curtain was a different story, a hidden truth too dark to imagine, and I was trapped in that truth, the unwilling participant in his cruel theater. What haunted me most was the realization that nobody saw it. Nobody even questioned it. He was adored, trusted, admired, and I was left to carry the secret of who he really was. The enemy was not a stranger lurking outside the house. It was the boy who lived inside it, the one who wore the title of brother-like armor. The betrayal of that truth is something I will never forget, because it taught me that danger does not always come from where we expect. Sometimes it sits right next to us at the dinner table, smiling, laughing, pretending while quietly destroying everything we are inside. A child always believes that a mother will protect her. That is the foundation of trust, the unspoken promise that no matter what happens in the world outside, within the walls of a home, a mother will shield her child from harm. I held on to that belief longer than I should have. Each time I heard the door creak, each time fear crawled over my skin, I prayed silently that she would walk in, that she would see me, that she would finally stop pretending. But she never did. Her silence was heavier than any lock, stronger than any threat. It wrapped around me like an invisible prison, reminding me that even the one person who could save me chose not to. It is difficult to describe the feeling of being betrayed not just by the abuser, but by the person who was supposed to love you unconditionally. Sometimes I would catch her eyes lingering on me just for a second, as if she noticed the way my shoulders tensed or the way my laughter had disappeared. But she would look away just as quickly, turning her attention back to the stove, to the laundry, to anything that allowed her to pretend nothing was wrong. That avoidance cut deeper than words. It told me clearly that my suffering was something she had decided to live with, something she preferred to ignore rather than confront. There were nights when she knocked gently on the door, her voice soft as she asked if everything was fine. My mouth would open, desperate to tell her, desperate to scream that nothing was fine, but the weight of fear and the certainty of disbelief silenced me. Before I could gather the courage to speak, she would step inside with a tray of food, smiling faintly, offering it to him as if the room was ordinary and nothing unusual was happening. She would walk out again, closing the door behind her, leaving me frozen in place, understanding that her role was not to rescue me, but to serve him. I wondered endlessly if she knew. Did she truly understand what was happening in that room? Or did she convince herself it was easier not to ask? Perhaps in her mind, silence protected the family image, the fragile appearance of normalcy that she clung to. Perhaps she thought she was powerless, or perhaps she simply chose him over me. The truth is, I never got an answer, and that unanswered question has haunted me ever since. Psychologists often talk about the concept of learned helplessness, the idea that when you are exposed to constant harm with no rescue, you eventually stop fighting. I lived that truth before I even understood the words. Every time my mother looked away, every time she ignored the signs, I felt a piece of my will dissolve. Her silence told me my pain was not worth protecting, that I was expected to endure. And so I endured, carrying the weight of two betrayals, one from him and one from her. I remember sitting at the kitchen table in the mornings, watching her pour coffee, her hands steady, her expression calm. She would ask if I wanted toast or eggs, her voice as gentle as any mother's voice should be. I would answer politely, almost mechanically, even though I had not slept, even though my body ached with memories of the night before. How could she not see the exhaustion in my eyes, the way I flinched when someone touched me, the way I shrank into myself? A mother notices everything, yet mine chose to notice nothing. There were times when I tried to test her, leaving small clues, hoping she would finally open her eyes. I stopped eating at dinner. I avoided looking at him. I cried quietly in the bathroom, hoping she would hear. But if she did, she pretended not to. She would tell me to wash my face, to come back to the table, to stop being dramatic. The message was clear. Whatever storm was raging inside me was not welcome in her world. She wanted quiet, and my silence became her peace. The cruelest part of her silence was the way it reshaped my idea of love. As a child, you measure your worth through the eyes of your parents. If your mother cannot see your pain, if she refuses to save you, then you begin to believe you are not worth saving. You begin to believe that love comes with conditions, that protection is not guaranteed, that affection can coexist with abandonment. Those lessons followed me into adulthood, long after the doors stopped locking and the footsteps faded. Sometimes I imagined what it would have felt like if she had chosen differently, if she had stormed into the room, if she had grabbed me by the hand and pulled me away, if she had told him no more. I imagined her holding me, telling me I was safe, promising to protect me. I dreamed of that moment so often it became more real than the life I was living. But when I woke each day, I woke to silence, to the sound of plates clattering in the sink, to the sight of her avoiding my eyes. Dreams were the only place where I had a mother who saved me. What makes her silence even more painful is that I know she saw enough to suspect. She saw the way I avoided being in the same room with him. She saw the way I changed, the light in me dimming. A mother feels those things instinctively. She had to have known, even if she never admitted it. And that knowledge, that quiet complicity, is a wound that never fully closes. Because silence is not neutral. It is a choice. And her choice left me alone in a war I could never win. When I look back now, I understand that silence can be as violent as action. Her refusal to protect me was not passive. It was active abandonment, a betrayal that ran so deep it split me in two. I was a child standing in the middle of a fire, and the one person who should have lifted me out simply turned her back and walked away. That abandonment shaped every part of me, because it proved that love can fail, and when it fails, it leaves scars deeper than any wound inflicted by an enemy. I wanted to be a little girl. I wanted to spend afternoons dressing my dolls, braiding their hair, pretending they were part of a world where everything was safe and warm. My biggest worry should have been whether my favorite toy dress was clean or if my dollhouse door could stay shut. Childhood was supposed to be about laughter that echoed through small rooms, about running barefoot on the grass until the sun went down. But those moments were stolen from me before I even understood what being a child truly meant. He told me my body was no longer that of a little girl, and those words carved themselves into me like a curse I could not escape. Innocence is fragile. Once broken, it can never be pieced back together the same way. I remember looking at my reflection in the mirror, my small frame still unmistakably that of a child, and wondering how I could already feel so old, so used, so ruined. My dolls sat on the shelf, untouched, their plastic smiles mocking me with a purity I no longer recognized in myself. The gap between who I should have been and who I was forced to become grew wider with each passing day. There are moments that remain sharper than others. The way the curtains swayed while the air in the room turned heavy. The way my laughter stuck in my throat, choked off before it could leave my mouth. The way his voice, low and commanding, erased every trace of playfulness. Each act of violence was not just physical. It was a theft. It was the robbery of dreams I had not yet dreamed, of moments I would never get to live. And though my body was still small, my mind was burdened with knowledge no child should ever carry. I often imagined what my life would have looked like if things had been different. I thought about the children I saw at school, carefree, giggling about playground games, exchanging stickers, running into their mother's arms at the end of the day. Their biggest fears were scraped knees or forgotten homework. I envied them. I envied their ability to believe in safety. I envied their laughter because mine no longer belonged to me. I wore a mask, smiling at the right moments, but inside I felt hollow. The child in me was fading, replaced by someone who lived in shadows. The room where my toys should have filled the air with joy became instead a stage of suffering. The very bed that should have been a place for dreams became a place of dread. The walls absorbed secrets they would never repeat, secrets that pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. I was still so young, but I felt centuries older. I carried myself like someone weathered by storms that never ended, storms too powerful for a small body to resist. There is something tragic about learning too early that your body is not your own. A child should believe in ownership of self, should feel free to run, to play, to trust that no one will harm them. But when that ownership is stripped away, it leaves scars invisible to the world, yet impossible to ignore. I did not walk like the other children. I walked with hesitation, with an invisible weight pressing down on me. My shoulders slumped, my eyes avoided contact. My voice was quieter than it should have been, and those around me mistook it for shyness, for timidity. They never knew it was grief. I still remember the toys I left behind, the little tea set with missing cups, the stuffed bear with worn-out fur, the dresses I wanted to put on my dolls. They gathered dust as I stopped playing. Play belonged to innocence, and I had none left. Every time I looked at them, I felt a sharp sting in my chest, as if they were accusing me of abandoning them. But the truth is that I was the one abandoned, stripped of the very right to be a child. Sometimes I think about how quickly those years passed, yet how endless they felt. Days blurred into nights, and nights dragged into mornings, each carrying the same silent terror. I stopped marking time with seasons or birthdays. I marked time with the echoes of footsteps, with the sound of a key, with the ache that returned again and again. Childhood disappeared not in a single moment, but in countless ones, layered upon each other until there was nothing left of who I had been. What I lost was not only playfulness, but trust. Trust in safety, trust in love, trust in the idea that family protects. That trust is the foundation of childhood, and without it, everything collapses. I felt like a building stripped of its frame, standing but unstable, one strong wind away from falling apart, and no one noticed the cracks. To them, I was still a child. To me, I was a hollow shell, someone who wore the mask of youth but carried the soul of someone broken. The innocence that was stolen never returned. It lingered in the background of my life, reminding me of the girl I could have been. It showed itself in fleeting moments, like when I saw a child laughing freely or clutching a toy with unshakable joy. It reminded me that those things had once belonged to me, but were ripped away too soon. And each reminder cut deep because it proved how permanent the theft was. I never asked for that burden. I never asked to grow old before my time. But that is what happened. Childhood was supposed to be mine, yet it was taken and replaced with silence, fear, and the constant reminder that I was no longer allowed to be a child. And that loss became the shadow I carried with me into every room, every interaction, every moment of my life that followed. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a presence that lingers in the air, a shadow that clings to every corner of your mind. I lived inside that fear day after day, night after night, until it became part of me. To the world outside, I looked like a quiet little girl who kept to herself. But inside, I carried storms too violent to explain. My silence was not a choice. It was survival. I learned early that words could be dangerous. His threats were sharp, spoken in a low tone that never needed to be raised. He told me that if I ever spoke, no one would believe me. He told me that my family would hate me for trying to ruin him. He told me that if I opened my mouth, something worse would happen. And even though I was only a child, I believed him. Children believe the words of those they fear. They take them as truth, as law, as sentences carved into stone. At school, I watched other children laugh freely. Their giggles rang through hallways, careless and pure. I wanted to join them, to let my voice rise and blend with theirs, but fear pressed down on my chest and kept me silent. I smiled when I needed to, nodded when teachers called my name, but I never really spoke. Words felt dangerous, and I guarded them tightly. My silence became a cage, one that isolated me even when I was surrounded by people. Nighttime was the worst. The house would grow quiet, the kind of quiet that should have been peaceful, but instead filled me with dread. I would lie in bed, my body tense, waiting. My ears caught every sound, a creak in the hallway, the whisper of footsteps, the faint click of a door. Each noise was magnified inside my mind, until my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Sleep never came easily. Even when exhaustion closed my eyes, fear pulled me awake with nightmares that mirrored reality too closely. The isolation grew with time. I felt like I was living in two worlds, one where I had to pretend to be normal and one where I carried the unbearable weight of truth. In front of others, I forced myself to smile. I answered when spoken to, even though my voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. But inside, I was trapped in a world no one could see. The loneliness was crushing. There is nothing heavier than a secret you are too afraid to tell. I searched desperately for signs of safety, for anyone who might notice. A teacher who asked why I looked tired, a neighbor who wondered why I never played outside, a relative who looked at me with concern. Each time I wanted to speak, the words rose like a tide in my throat, but the fear always stopped them. What if they laughed at me? What if they called me a liar? What if he found out and made good on his threats? The risks felt too high, and so I stayed silent. Children who carry secrets often become experts at hiding. I became one of them. I learned how to control my face so it never betrayed me. I learned how to answer questions without revealing too much. I learned how to cry silently into my pillow so no one would hear. These were not lessons I should have learned as a child, but they became second nature to me. The mask I wore grew heavier every day, but I could not take it off. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. I carried the fear in my posture, in the way I hunched my shoulders, in the way my hands fidgeted when someone came too close. Even years later, long after those nights ended, my body still reacted. Loud noises startled me. Footsteps behind me made my skin crawl. Locked doors made me feel trapped. Fear trained my body to live in a constant state of alert, and that state became my normal. Sometimes I think about how silence spreads. It is not just a personal prison. It infects everything around it. My silence allowed him to keep his mask intact, allowed my mother to keep pretending, allowed the world to remain blind. Silence is what abusers depend on most. It keeps them safe and keeps their victims alone. And I was proof of that. My silence was his strongest weapon, because it meant that nobody knew and nobody tried to stop him. Looking back, I realized that the isolation was almost as destructive as the abuse itself. Being hurt is one kind of pain. Being hurt and left alone with it is another. It eats away at you slowly, convincing you that you are invisible, that your suffering does not matter, that you are destined to carry it forever. And that belief digs deep into the soul, shaping everything you become. The silence grew so powerful that it felt like another person in the room, watching, waiting, pressing me down. It was not just the absence of words. It was a living thing that suffocated me, binding me tighter than any rope could. I wanted to scream, but the scream stayed locked inside, echoing in a place no one else could hear. That scream is still inside me, a soundless reminder of the years I spent drowning in fear and isolation. The damage did not stay locked in childhood. It grew with me, threading itself into every part of my life, shaping how I saw myself, how I trusted others, how I walked through the world. People often assume that pain fades with time, that once you leave the walls where the abuse happened, you become free. But the truth is that the body remembers, the heart remembers, and the mind carries scars invisible to everyone else. I carried them into adulthood like a second skin, a skin I never chose but could never shed. There were years when I could not look in the mirror without flinching. I saw not just my reflection but the shadow of the little girl who was never allowed to grow the way she should have. I saw shame staring back at me, shame that did not belong to me but lived inside me anyway. Trust became almost impossible. How could I let anyone close when the first people who should have protected me were the ones who caused my ruin? Friendships felt fragile, relationships felt dangerous, and love felt like a language I would never fully understand. Even in moments of joy, the past intruded. A laugh that should have felt free came with a sting, a reminder of the laughter I lost. A gentle touch could send me spiraling back into fear, my body reacting before my mind even registered what was happening. Trauma does not vanish when the abuser is gone. It lives on inside, rising without warning, reminding you that safety is never guaranteed. The future I once imagined for myself felt stolen. I wanted to be someone full of dreams, someone fearless, someone who could run into the world with open arms. Instead, I grew cautious, hesitant, walking carefully as if the ground beneath me could collapse at any moment. Opportunities passed me by because I did not believe I was worthy of them. Relationships slipped away because I could not trust enough to hold them. Life became a series of shadows, the promise of what could have been swallowed by the weight of what was. And yet somewhere in the middle of all this pain, I learned survival. I learned resilience. The same silence that once imprisoned me eventually gave me strength. The same fear that once paralyzed me taught me how to recognize danger before it struck. The scars became part of my story, not the end of it. Even though he tried to ruin me, he did not destroy all of me. There were still pieces left, pieces that fought to grow, pieces that refused to let my childhood define my entire life. It has taken years to speak, to find the words I once buried. But now I tell this story, not to relive the pain, but to take back what was stolen. Each word spoken is a crack in the silence that once kept me prisoner. Each truth revealed is a step toward freedom. And if my story reaches even one person who feels alone, who feels trapped in their own silence, then the pain I carry will not have been in vain. To those who have listened to my story, I want to say thank you. Thank you for giving me your time, for hearing what so many refused to see, for standing witness to a truth I carried alone for too long. Sharing this is not easy. It costs something every time. But knowing that you are here, listening, gives meaning to the scars. And I also want to say something to anyone who has lived through pain like mine. You are not invisible. You are not ruined. You are not defined by the actions of those who hurt you. Your voice matters. Your life matters. And no matter how deep the darkness runs, there is still a light within you that cannot be taken away. I survived. I am still here. And though my brother stole my childhood, he did not steal my future entirely, because my future is still being written, word by word, choice by choice, day by day. And this story, painful as it is only one part of who I am. Thank you for walking through this with me, for letting my voice reach you. If this story moved you, if it touched something inside you, I invite you to continue with me. The next video is waiting on your screen. Click it and let us keep uncovering the truths that deserve to be told.